But for 30 years, we lived across the street from the Labingers. And we moved 3 years ago. And now they're moving to right across the street from us, which is, I think, kind of shows what attractive powers we have. That's how I'm going to attract them. Andrea is emerita at the University of Laverne. Her BA is from Hunter College. She's actually from Yonkers, New York. In fact, very few people besides me know. And that's not too far from where I grew up. But her BA is from Hunter, and she has an MA and a PhD from Harvard. At Laverne, she was one of the charter members of the Laverne Academy and founded the honors program, which is, I know, a number of people remember very well. She now translates from the Spanish. I think it's just from the Spanish. So if you see her with a dictionary in one hand and a pen in the other, that's probably what she's doing. But she's been nominated for the Penheim Translation Award for one book, and was a finalist for Best Translated Book Award by The Millions magazine. Her most recent publications include Proceed with Caution, Stories and a Novella by Patricia Ratto, which is, I think, what I saw on the screen before, Daughter by Anna Maria Shua, and The Clerk by Guillermo Sacamano. Those are, I guess, what she spends her time doing. So it's really an honor for me to introduce my neighbor and colleague, Andrea Labinger.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Chuck. That was great. You didn't explain that we've been stalking you for the past 37 years, right? This is what's really happening. Now, I'll tell you, when we moved into our house in 1980, what was it, 3, Chuck came over. I already knew him from the university, but I only knew him a little at that time. And he said, oh, I see the property values are going down in our neighborhood. And then 37 years later, they move away, and then we follow them to the new neighborhood. And I said, see, we're continuing the tradition of making sure the property values are kept at a reasonable level wherever you move. So thank you to Chuck for the introduction, and thank you to Al for inviting me to give a talk to this wonderful mixture of students and faculty and colleagues that I remember and new people that I hope to meet. And so I'm going to get started right away because there's a lot to talk about, and I know you all have to go and do important things. So I'm going to turn on my PowerPoint here. Let's see if this share screen.
Click on PowerPoint.
Click on PowerPoint.
And now click up. Start from beginning.
From beginning. Great. Okay, so I don't see anything but this, but no, anyway, I think this should be just fine.
Andrea, we don't see your share screen. There must be something that went wrong. At least I don't.
I know what it is. I think I do. Wait a second. Okay, I think I forgot something. Wait, okay.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I have to hit a share. I didn't do that.
You did. Okay, then
no.
Go back to Zoom. Click on the Zoom.
Where's Zoom?
Right there.
Okay. Yeah.
There. Click there.
Where?
Right there, where your finger is. Okay, now share over there.
That's what I forgot to do. Now can you see?
There it is. We're getting close. There, perfect.
Okay, now we can do this. Yay. All right, thank you very much for my technical assistant over here, Jay. The title that was on the announcement varies, it differs a little bit because I was playing around with it and I wanted to put a subtitle because all academic presentations have to have a subtitle. It's in the rules book. So I put Translating Southern Cone Literature in the Year of the Plague. And well, everybody knows what I mean by that, but Southern Cone literature might require a little bit of explanation. We're talking about Argentina and Chile primarily, the very southernmost part of South America, which is where most of my source books come from. And as we've all experienced, it's been a year of, like no other, it's been a year of instability and anguish, social isolation for some of us, and tension. So how do you cope with that? We've all managed in our own way, and maybe some of us have even tried to find a way to channel our energies into useful or productive or creative endeavors. I've tried. And since I write, that's what I do, because translation is a form of writing. And if you're penned up at home with a computer as your best friend and a lifeline to the outside world, sometimes you seek an outlet doing what you know best, which is writing stuff. And miraculously, sometimes that stuff gets published, which is a good outcome. So that's what happened to me. I'm not trying to suggest that the year represents work that this output of this year represents work I did during the year itself. No, that would be a lie. There's some other material that had been lying in drawers here and there, neglected, forgotten, but which suddenly, because of the global tumults we've all been experiencing, seem to become more relevant, particularly works that deal with the dark side of life, with dystopias and unpleasant things. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my adventures this year in literary translation, and focusing especially on one writer, Patricia Ratto, who is new to the North American literary scene. And I'll conclude by reading one of her short stories, Rara Avis, in my English translation. And if we have time left over, I'd love to have an open discussion with you about any aspect of this talk. But first, I'd like to introduce you to some of the writers I've been privileged to work with during this year of the plague. This is Guillermo Sacomano. He was born in 1948, and he is Argentine. Sacomano writes mostly noir fiction, dark tales from the mean streets, filled with criminals, lost souls, newspapermen who drink too much, that's a common trope, gangs of marauding teens whose brains are fried on drugs, kind of jolly stuff, you know. But he's a terrific writer, and I love his work. I've translated 3 of his novels so far and would be happy to do more. The book I translated recently, it came out last year with Open Letter Press, is called The Clerk. It could be described as dystopian fiction, except for the fact, an ironic fact, that what started out to be a grim, futuristic fantasy, especially for him, has over the course of time come to be a slice of life, realistic piece, at least according to the author. It's as if Kafka had gotten together with a science fiction writer to create a world that's even darker and ironically funny than our own world. If you like books in which armored helicopters circle overhead and clone dogs roam the streets and garbage trucks come by every morning to collect the dead, you will love The Clerk. The next writer, some of you may recognize her, is Ana Maria Shua. She's been a guest, an invited speaker at the University of Louvain a few times, and has talked about her fiction many, many times to both university and community audiences all over the world. Ani is from Argentina. She was born in 1951, very prolific writer. No stranger to the literary community of the United States. In fact, her works have been translated into Korean and Chinese and all kinds of other languages. I'm very, very lucky to be able to translate her into English. It's a joy. She's very gifted. So far, I've translated 3 of her traditional length novels, including the most recent one, which is called Daughter. And it was published by Literal Press last year. Daughter is interesting, both for its description of a totally immoral or amoral, I guess, human being, the eponymous daughter, whose downward spiral from middle-class respectability to lawlessness and an anticipated unhappy ending. That makes it a compelling book. And if you want a character study of a person who's just pure ego with no concern for anybody else, well, you could either read this book or just read the papers, I suppose. Every other chapter in this book provides us with Shua's own frank discussion of the technical and thematic difficulties she encountered while writing the novel. And so the experience, it's very meta experience. It's like being inside the works of an especially beautiful but dysfunctional clock. And it's completely intriguing. The next author I dealt with is I never expected to be asked to do a poetry book because I don't do poetry, but it just happened. This is Gustavo Gac Artigas from Chile. He was born in 1944, and he's primarily known for his work with the theater. He's a playwright and a director and an actor. He earned his reputation in the turbulent 1960s and 1970s, traveling around Europe and Latin America, sometimes in a ramshackle bus, and sometimes having to negotiate with military checkpoints stationed along the way. It was a very dangerous kind of life, an adventurous life, in the effort to bring theater to the people. A lot of his work is political, as you might imagine. I did a memoir novel for him, but the most recent work, the one that I did over the course of the past year, was this book of lyric love poetry dedicated to his wife, Priscilla Gac Artigas, who's a Spanish professor from Puerto Rico. The book looks like this, and it's unusual because it's in 3 languages, Spanish original, an English translation, which we called Longings, and a French translation by Priscilla, his wife, called J'aimerais tant. It was a challenge because, as I say, I'm not a poet and had never done poetry before, but it was a lot of fun. And this is Patricia Ratto, the person who will be occupying our attention for the rest of this hour or so. She's from Argentina. She was born in 1962. And I never knew her before. I was introduced to her by Ana Maria Shua, whom you saw a few seconds ago. According to Ani Shua, I just had to read Patricia Ratto because she is so talented. Her work is so compelling and beautiful and original, and yet she was totally unknown in the United States. The first thing by Patricia that I read was a novella, a short novel called, in Spanish, Trasfondo, and in English, Submerged. And there you can see a picture of a submarine because inside this book, there is the whole of Trasfondo or Submerged, plus 8 short stories. Trasfondo or Submerged tells the true story in novella form of the SS San Luis, an Argentine submarine that found itself abandoned in the South Atlantic during the Falklands War of 1982, in Spanish known as the Guerra de las Malvinas. It was a total disaster for the Argentines. They were soundly defeated by the better equipped British naval force. And they had all kinds of technical problems, including torpedo launchers that didn't launch, and computers that failed, and a motor that failed. And yet they miraculously managed to get back to port with no fatalities. This book is sometimes very dreamlike and poetic, and sometimes it's very technical. So I had to go do a lot of research on submarines to familiarize myself with the vocabulary and learn about how things work on a sub. And then I tried to get this novel or novella published, but unfortunately it was too short, you see, because in America, in the United States of America, the novella is not as popular as it is in other countries. It's much more popular in Latin America or in Europe. It seems that US readers want big, fat, juicy novels. They want to get their money's worth when they buy a book. And so the publishers tend to avoid publishing novellas as standalone pieces. They would rather pad it. And so Tim Schaffner of Schaffner Press said, look, is there anything else she's written that you can combine with this and we can produce a book? So we found some short stories. She's a great short story writer. And by putting them together with a novella, we came up with what looks like a novel, or well, a full-length book, 200 pages, say. And what I'm going to read to you today comes from that book. But I do want to thank Tim Schaffner for he's a visionary, really, and his editor, Sean Murphy, also had the insight and creativity to recognize Patricia's talent and to make a book out of this instead of saying, sorry, we don't do novellas. So what connects everything here? What connects everything in this book, which we've called Proceed with Caution, is that just about every story has a relationship in it between a human being and a non-human, whether that be a real animal or a mythical creature. For example, there's a story in which a jealous parrot named Ernesto resents the fact that his owner's brutish boyfriend comes over for dinner. And it's a pretty funny story. Or there's the Quintai, which is a story about the whaling industry in Latin America. The story I'm going to read to you, Rara Avis, is about this. Not a very nice birdie. This is a cassowary, I'll tell you right now so you'll know, because it comes out in the story. At first we don't know what this is, but take a look at this thing. Of the 4 flightless birds, the ostrich and the emu and the South American rhea and the cassowary is Australian and is by far the most lethal. I learned this too in my research. They have very sharp talons and they can easily kill people. So without further ado, I'm going to proceed to read this very short story to you, and then hopefully we can talk about it at the end. So here we go. I am going to end share. There, yep.
Word.
Okay,
Pick the story.
here we go. All right,
Perfect.
thank you. This is called Rara Avis by Patricia Ratto. Now, sitting in an evangelical church that he found open by accident in the middle of the night, he speculates that his life changed forever, perhaps by divine design, perhaps by a whim of fate. That day, when on his way home from the university, he crossed the park, backpack slung over his shoulder, taking a shortcut to get there faster. Suddenly, the facts congeal at a point in his memory, which today, when he tries to retrieve them, makes them appear as a single event. Hearing the plop of something falling straight down before his eyes, stopping in his tracks, looking down to discover where the rounded tips of his sneakers ended, a thing, sparsely covered by fine brownish-gray feathers, lifting his eyes instinctively to find the place it came from, and spotting a low-flying chimango, hearing the screech of the chimango, and at the same time watching it ascend and circle over his own head, understanding that the thing at his feet was the chimango's victim, and not knowing what to do till it opens one eye, and then seeing for the first time, as if he himself had opened his eyes at that moment, the pinkness of a wound. Redirecting his gaze upward and gesturing theatrically with his arms to drive the chimango away. Seeing the chimango give up and leave, and then standing there alone before that thing, wounded and with one eye open, making him feel all the loneliness in the world, looking around because he doesn't know what else to do, squatting to witness how, from the mass of its upwardly stretched body, a head and a beak emerge, and 2 eyes that seem to brim over with terror. Extending a hand to touch, feeling the warmth and trembling, the horrific confirmation that this thing is indeed alive and that he ought to do something about it. Looking all around once more, not a soul anywhere, and it's growing dark. Deciding at last to pick up the animal, which on being grasped from the back, extends a pair of very long legs, accommodating the creature in his left hand, feeling it curl up till it assumes the perfect shape of an egg, and walking with that warm, throbbing thing all the way home. Putting it in a box and beginning to think about what to do. How? Not knowing where to seek help, nor what sort of creature the thing is, which, on closer examination, seems to be a pigeon chick, gangly and rustic. Surfing the internet and coming across a couple of videos that explain everything, or nearly everything. Realizing that he urgently needs to go out again to the pharmacy 7 blocks away to buy baby cereal, a syringe to feed it, and iodine solution to clean the wound. Once more braving the cold, more intense now because it's almost nighttime, walking, wondering why this thing had to fall from the sky, walking, arriving at the pharmacy, asking for the baby cereal, and seeing how the clerk smiles at him the way you smile at a father who's good to his son and who goes shopping for his wife. But he has no son, no wife, no girlfriend, no family, nothing but that creature. Wondering why he hadn't just left it where it fell so that the chimango might carry it off again, and then asking for the syringe and the iodine solution after that, and explaining as if making excuses for himself that it's to feed and heal God knows what kind of a chick that he found in the park. The clerk looking at him indulgently, the way you look at an idiot who's trying to revive some dumb bird. Noticing that the clerk is pretty cute, but at that moment unable to summon any feeling but hatred toward her. Forcing a goodbye, paying with the last of his money for the month, walking, and wondering what he'll find when he gets home. Weighing the possibility that he might find it dead, inexplicably hoping he won't. Picking up his pace, opening the front door, reaching the kitchen in 2 steps, peeking into the box, and seeing it there still vibrating like the tuning fork he uses every so often to tune his guitar. He goes back on the internet, turns on the video, and follows the instructions. First, the iodine solution and a speck of cotton that he dips in it and gently swabs on the wound, wondering if it burns, and if in any case that burning isn't life itself. Finally, he prepares the food, places it in the syringe, opens the bird's beak, introduces the paste little by little so that it won't choke, taking care not to cover its nostrils, the creature's round eyes as wide open as can be. And then a sleepless night, sleeping just a little, rising at dawn, running to check on it, watching it stand, and secretly, internally celebrating, going to the university so as not to give up the vices of the chronic student, returning home, eating something, drinking water because there's no more juice or wine, feeding the creature and giving it water too, having a mate, then a sandwich for dinner, sleeping, getting up, going to check on it, feed it, rejoicing at its hunger and how its wound is healing, going to the university, getting home, eating, both he and the creature, playing the guitar, the creature spying over the edge of the box, then sleeping, getting up, going to check, taking it out of the box, watching it suddenly move, eat, shit, drink water, growing unbelievably fast, and suddenly thinking that what fell out of the sky is something like a nyandu. And one day, shooting it out to the little square of grass on his tiny patio, drinking, eating, sleeping, shitting, he and the ever-expanding creature that looks more and more like a nyandu, noticing one day, but he's already losing sight of which day it was, that a strange hard thing is growing on its head. And one afternoon seeing some black feathers pop out, silky and fine as hairs, and noting that the protuberance on its head is turning into something like a bony crest, and beginning to imagine that it's not a nyandu, that it has to be something else, and consulting with a veterinary student who says, no idea, but he'll try to find out, and getting up in the middle of the night after a murky nightmare and going over to the counter for a glass of water, looking out at the little patio, determining that the creature's face and part of its neck are completely covered with minuscule rainbow-colored feathers, and standing there staring, the creature in turn with its now enormous feet staring right back at him, becoming aware that by now it must come up to his knees, and realizing after surfing the internet that what he has in his house is a cassowary, an Australian bird, huge and solitary, flightless and potentially very aggressive, with its sharp talons and rigid crest, even to the point of causing human death. Wondering again and again where that Australian cassowary might have come from, thrown to his feet by a chimango, in any case, a local species, and wondering incidentally why him, and beginning to doubt everything, the chimango, the entire episode, his memory, his eyes, which now contemplate the oversized creature, strange and lovely, curled up in one corner of the patio, and unable to feel fear or fright, but only sorrow for it, a cold blue sorrow. Deciding then to find a more appropriate home for it, asking here and there, taking it to a neighbor's farm, but it doesn't last long there, having kicked against the wire fence with its talons and frightened dogs, the chickens. Discovering when they return it to him that the creature recognizes him, producing very strange but friendly sounds, as if communicating with one of its own, and lies down at his feet, receiving offers then from people who want to buy it, fearing the intentions of some of those people, finding out that there's a vedette in Buenos Aires who wants to make herself an outfit from the exotic plumage of his cassowary, seeing it plucked alive to prevent its plumes from losing their shine and to allow for the possibility of their growing back. Becoming aware also of clandestine animal fights, fights to the death on the outskirts of the city, and feeling nausea and disgust at the mere idea of having saved the creature just to hand it over to its death or to a hellish life in exchange for a few pesos. Trying to get in touch with environmental associations to return the cassowary to its habitat, but finding it too expensive and impractical, allowing it to enter the apartment so as not to confine it to the territorial meagerness of his patio, knowing that this decision is like resigning himself to chaos and the unforeseen, sharing spaces, being invaded, becoming even more disorganized than he was before. Looking it in the eye one day and realizing that things can't go on like this, and once again not knowing what to do. Finding himself one afternoon in the midst of his turmoil, peeling an orange and hearing a gut-wrenching screech coming from the patio, and going outside just like that, startled, with a half-peeled orange in one hand and a knife in the other. Seeing it come toward him, and suddenly, without knowing how, understanding that the knife blade has disappeared and lodged itself in the dense black plumage beneath its maw. Detecting a bit of blood spurting out, suddenly managing to kneel and receive the cassowary's head, which falls like an offering against his chest, the serene eyes fixed on him, and all the turquoise of the head and neck feathers spilling over his hands. When he looks backward, that is what he can see, a living thing, which turned out to be a cassowary, falling on him from the sky, and he, no longer knowing where to go, now sitting in the church, hearing a talk about the end of the world, his hands tinted a blazing iridescent turquoise that he hasn't been able to remove, no matter how he's tried. Okay, that's the story. Is everybody still there?
Wow.
Wow, that was wow.
I would love to start if we have time, don't we, for a conversation. I have some points that if you don't bring them up, I'll bring them up, but I'd love to give you the opportunity to say whatever you want to say about the story or ask a question.
Yeah, first we'll ask to see whether any students, since we have plenty of, we're packed with professors, we'll ask this, any student would like to ask a question or comment on the story.
Quick question. So, I mean, for one, the story was incredible. That was great. But how does this translating process even go? Kind of like, where do you start with this? Because in order to get this amazing product, I'm really curious, how does this process even go?
Well, it's a good question. And then it goes lots of different ways. I mean, for me, when I know the first book I do by an author is always the hardest because I don't know their voice. Because what you have to do is slip into their skin, right? I mean, there's a certain amount of liberty you have as a translator, choosing this versus that expression, but you're circumscribed by the voice of the author, yeah? And so because I didn't know Patricia very well, it took me a while to get into the rhythm of it. Is that what you're referring to? Then she doesn't speak a lot of English. She speaks some. That's also, you know, a factor. If you have an author who's fluent, I've had a few in English, then you can have these conversations. They'll say, I don't think that you used the right word here because what I was trying to convey is such and such. But if they don't speak English, they trust you implicitly, kind of the way this cassowary trusted the guy who brought him home. And, you know, you just have to pray that you're not going to end up stabbing him in the neck or betraying his voice. Usually I read the story several times over, and then I do a draft, and then I'll do another draft, and I may go back and read it again. And, it's kind of a constant process. It's kind of like doing your own writing in a way, because you're doing proofreading and correcting until it's right. And sometimes it's never right. Is that what you were aiming for with your question? Or
Yes, that's
or
exactly.
is there some
what I
other
was
aspect
wondering.
of
No, that answered it perfectly.
yeah,
but
that
I was
it
really
kind of
just
worked for me.
curious.
That's how I do it anyway. I don't know about other translators.
Any other student want to ask a question before we open it up to the whole group?
Hi, Sean.
Okay, it's opened up to anybody who wants to ask. Andrew, I'm going to ask a
Al,
dumb
can you be
question.
the sort of coordinator?
Yeah, I was going to ask a dumb question, and I hope you don't laugh at how dumb it sounds, but it in some ways goes off of what Nick asked just a minute ago, and that's a question of. I was wondering what the punctuation was in that
Oh,
story, since there
Frozen.
were so many one-word
I didn't
sentences.
hear it.
Oh, you can't hear me?
It got cut off. Something about one-word sentences.
Well, I was wondering the punctuation. It was such a wonderfully
Ah,
moving story. How are those all periods, commas, semicolons?
oh, that is actually it's a great question. It's a terrific question. I'm glad you brought it up. Latin America, and you'll back me up on this, I hope. In Spanish, they tend to use what we would call run-on sentences a lot more than we do. We would have our red pens out there and say, no, 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 run-on sentence, run-on sentence. But they're perfectly acceptable. And Patricia, especially, she loves them. I mean, she eats run-on sentences for breakfast. And so a lot of this, she wanted it to be a continuum of activity, going home, feeding the bird, doing this, doing that, having a cup of tea, whatever he did, playing the guitar. She does not separate those at all. They just, so some of the biggest discussions we have had were concerned with the punctuation. She didn't want me to break it up and turn it into US style, short, direct sentences. She wanted to maintain that flow. So, so if you read it in print, you'll say, gee, there are a lot of commas here. And she was adamant about it. So I think it was not just a quirk or a tick that she has. She wanted the reader to feel carried along by this constant process of caring for the bird. And it comes up in some of her other stories as well. When she, like the submarine story, when she wants to increase the tension and the boredom and the sense of isolation, she more or less eliminates her sentences. Sean, did you have a hand up? No? Hi.
I was just waiting.
Julia, you
waving
had a
earlier.
question? Okay, hi. Did you have a question, Julia? No, I thought I saw a hand. Okay, I want to ask you a question, then maybe you can take this little question. Yeah,
I had a question. I was wondering,
no?
a very interesting story, and a little bit disturbing, but interesting in that way. The story seems to be framed, with, religion. I was wondering if the author had any particular metaphysical views.
Okay. Well, I haven't asked her about her religious beliefs, but that was my first question, or my second question. Why do you think the story begins and ends with the protagonist in a church. And then there's another, those of you who are, into Catholic iconography, it's almost and don't forgive me, I don't mean to offend in any way, but there's this beautiful image of the bird offering himself or itself and putting his head in this guy's lap. It's almost like, to me, I visualize a Pietà scene, although it's the guy who murdered the bird. What is that all about? Is it that we kill beauty in our lives, or things that are so sublimely miraculous and we don't know what to do with them or how to treat them because they are dangerous? Why? There's no other place for him to seek refuge except in this church. And it comes back again at the end of the story. I don't have the answer, but I found it profoundly disturbing.
Also is interesting.
And there's one sentence in there that suggests, please.
No, go ahead, please, Andrea.
No, there was just one fragment of a sentence that suggested that maybe none of this ever really happened, she said at once. I don't know if you caught that little, thinking that, is it true that I really have a cassowary on my patio? Is it true that it really fell out of the sky from another bird's mouth? Maybe I'm imagining this. Maybe I'm spending too much time alone with my computer and not, keeping my social distance from everybody. Maybe I'm imagining the cassowary. Anyway, that's another possibility. Please, what was your question now?
Well, it also, the religious group that he chose to jump in the church. I mean, I'm assuming, I've never been to Argentina, but I'm assuming there's lots and lots of Catholic churches and only a few of these Protestant churches, such as
evangelical.
Evangelical. So that was another interesting quirk to the story.
It is, and I'll talk to Patricia probably in the next couple of days, because she's asked for a recording of this session. I think she's very interested in knowing what everybody has to say about her story. I'm going to ask her, because I never have. I'm going to say, why an evangelical church, and what did you have in mind? Is there something specific that you were trying to tell us there? Because maybe not. Maybe I don't know. There's something about all of her work, though, and unfortunately or fortunately, I don't, depending on what else you're going to do today. If you read a few more stories of hers, you would see that her characters are so achingly lonely. All of them, just about all of them, are so lonely, so isolated, and that manifests in many different ways. In this story, it's clear. This man lives alone. He goes to school. Leads a very kind of Spartan existence. And this gorgeous bird comes into his life, and it represents things that he doesn't have. It's danger on the one hand, and alleviation of his boredom. It's tenderness on the other hand. Aesthetically, it satisfies a need for beauty in his life. Why does he kill it? The story Proceed with Caution, there's a story called Proceed with Caution, which is actually the name of the book. It has a lot of meanings to me, Proceed with Caution. It's about an elderly woman who lives in a nursing home, and she has visits from this, what's called a cynocephalus, half dog, half man. I'm not going to tell you too much because maybe you'll want to read the story. And it's destroying little by little parts of her room, eating up the walls and the doors, and until, like those polar bears clinging to the tiny ice floe, she has very little left in her life, and yet she loves this dog man that comes to see her. So all of the characters have an interaction with something non-human that fulfills some loss or some lack in their lives, and yet contain the elements of danger, possibly destruction.
Andrea, this is Julie, and I don't have a question, but just going off what you said about what he does with things he loves. Even his response to the clerk in the store, he looked at her, she was pretty,
Yes.
but his hatred, I mean, you could be frustrated or perturbed, you know, because you want to get, but that the hatred. So here's something beautiful or attractive, or maybe it holds love, like maybe a woman for him holds love or the possibility of love, which could be beauty and danger and all those things. Just very interesting what she makes a point to say that he has no family, he has no child, no, nothing. He is all alone. And it makes me wonder, is it because of, is it his own design?
Yeah, it's true. Even he's self-destructive in many ways. I mean, as you said, that young woman in the pharmacy might have been an important person in his life if he had left the opportunity open for her, but he blocks it. Has a lot of fear. He has no friends apparently. You know, the bird dropping from the sky is a miracle, I think. Miracles have their good aspects and their bad. You know, they can be dangerous too. But he's not willing to take a chance. He's afraid of life.
Yeah, and if he's
by the way, in Yangdu,
sorry, Andrea, please go.
I just wanted to say that I didn't translate Nyandu, and maybe I should have. I just wanted to give it a little local color by using the local word. It's a rhea, R-H-E-A. It's like an ostrich. That's one of the, he thought it might be a Nyandu. It looked like a Nyandu, remember? He knew it was an ostrich-like kind of bird. I didn't think I needed to say rhea. So in case you were wondering what that was. And a chimango is, I don't know, it's called a karakara, but that doesn't help. It's a large enough bird to carry off the little chick. Okay, now that we've talked about ornithology, what were you going to say?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Also, Ken Marcus has his hand up. So.
No?
Yes, Andrea, thank you for your presentation and these wonderful stories. I wonder if we could step back a little bit and just talk about the position of translator in general, because it's a very curious position, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, you have this close connection to the authors, and on the other hand, you go home and you live a bit like the author herself in isolation, right? You're so connected to the work. And so I'm wondering, I just have this question about how do you overcome that isolation? Are there associations that you can connect with other translators? Are there ways of establishing common means of translation, contemporary translators and so on? I mean, how do you overcome those barriers perhaps as a translator?
That's a really important question that I like to address whenever somebody aspiring to become a literary translator asks me what it's like, because it can be very isolating, just like writing can be very isolating. And yes, there is a wonderful organization. There are many organizations, but the one I joined in 1998, when I first started doing this stuff, or 1999, it's called ALTA, A-L-T-A, like Alta Loma. And it stands for American Literary Translators Association. And it's run like any other professional organization. You know, we have conferences. This year, the conference was virtual because, well, obviously we couldn't get together. But when it's a real, in-person conference, we go to any number of wonderful cities, and we know each other. Most of us know each other for a long time. And then there are new people coming aboard who are always fun to meet and very exciting, the work that they're doing. And we give presentations of different sorts. We publish, if you want to do that, you can, there's Translation Review is a journal that's published at University of Texas, Dallas, I think. So you can publish an art theory. Translation theory is a legitimate academic discipline. And some people like to write articles in that vein. So there are a lot of ways that you can get together. For a short time, we had organized a Southern California group that we met anywhere from San Diego up to about here. And we would meet like every few months, but it became a little bit more than most people wanted to deal with. So that's what, this is really good for that, you know, virtual conversations. But yeah, we do meet, and they do have mentorship programs for emerging young translators, and there are fellowships so that they can be, they can attend the conferences, they can get their airfare paid for and their hotel, and you know, if you're in academia and you're doing translation primarily as your research, I was very lucky to be at the University of Laverne, I gotta say, because back when a lot of my colleagues at other universities were being told, oh, you can't use translation on your resume to help promotion or tenure applications. We don't consider that legitimate. You have to do critical theory or whatever. Laverne had always been very, very open, very receptive, and very encouraging to me, for which I'll be thankful forever. But yeah, I mean, those are some of the ways in which people can break down the barriers of isolation and still be literary translators.
Thank you.
I'm going to just step in very quickly before the next person. You mentioned at the beginning of your talk, when you were introducing everything, that Rhea was a flightless bird, but now this Rhea was flying over.
I thought so.
Didn't you say that?
No. It was the karakara that was flying over, and they thought it. I looked up a karakara. To me, it looked like a pigeon, but that was the chimango was not the Rhea. It was the nyandu. When he looked at this little bird as it was developing into a much bigger bird, he thought, "Oh, I think it might be a nyandu or a Rhea."
Okay.
It didn't occur to him that it was a cassowary because he wasn't in Australia, and you don't find too many cassowaries walking around in Argentina unless you're, you know, at a zoo or someplace. I've never seen one. I'm really eager to see one in person. Or
Yeah,
a
I think the
bird.
Los Angeles Zoo has one. I've seen them.
Do you get to feed them? No, I'm only kidding. I just don't imagine they would let you do that. Kathy. Hello.
Hi. I found myself being kind of lulled in a way that was not pleasant by all of the INGs in all of what would be verbs, you know, to have it that kind of repetitive. And I understand that's deliberate on the writer's part. But I was kind of wondering, what is it? I don't remember enough of my Spanish to know if that was also the same endings in the original Spanish.
They were all gerunds. They were all gerunds in the original. And I think the unpleasantness you experienced, well, I think it's supposed to have been deliberate, let's put it that way, because it's the tedium of caring for, you know, it's like having a baby. It's beautiful, and you know it's going to grow up into something really interesting, or at least you hope so. But it takes so much work, you know, that you're at work and you have to say, oh no, it's 3 o'clock, I have to go home and feed the bird, and I can't let it out because so. And then how he comes to care for it, he doesn't want it to fall into the wrong hands. It's, you know, like if you have to put your puppy up for adoption, it just kills me to think about it. But, you know, I want it to go to a good home. I don't want them to abuse this creature. I can't keep him, but I love him. And yeah.
Sounded also to me as though, you know, he was at conflict within himself about this creature that seems at times to be the epitome of the other, whatever that is, you know, whatever I don't know, don't understand, don't like. And yet he also becomes, or maybe always is, attracted to it at the same time.
Yes. What is alien, what is so unknowable to us often attracts us the most. And, you know, it's the whole package. You get the whole package, the beauty of the bird, the exoticism of the bird, and at the same time, its potential to do some real damage. It's the whole package. It's the package that we get when we fall in love or when we take any major life decisions, right? There's the anticipation of some wonderful stuff happening, and there's the possibility of some awful stuff happening. But if you never accept that, your life is not going to be terribly fruitful or interesting. I don't know. I mostly chose this particular story because it's so bizarre and because it's short enough. I wasn't sure, I didn't want to go on forever in a meeting that had to end after a certain amount of time. And some of the stories are considerably longer, but I would recommend that there's so much to them. There's another story about a girl in a park with her dog who meets a young man who's walking a cabbage on a leash. I'm not going to tell you anymore, but you have to read it. It's not as crazy as it sounds.
Since you're mentioning those stories, and you also mentioned that in order for the novella to be published, that you needed those stories, I was wondering, did you choose the stories to go in, or did the author choose the stories that went into that collection?
I translated an entire book of short stories. Not all of the stories came from the same source book, but many of them did. She has a book called Fauna, Wildlife, from which all the creature stories came, and this one too, I think. And then she also had some of the other short stories published in different collections or separately. So I sent them all, and the editor, he chose the ones he liked best and the ones that he thought cohered. And I happened to share his taste. He thought that Proceed with Caution, the eponymous story, was his favorite. It's my favorite too, but it's a little bit too long for us. So I couldn't use it today. But yeah, that one really just blows me away. And I kind of was interested in the idea of the cassowary. So that's why I chose this one. So thank you guys. I really appreciated this opportunity to see you, some familiar people again, and some new faces. And thank you, Al, so much.
Andrea, before you go, can we get your
reconnecting?
Andrea? Before you go, can we have your take on what the cassowary represents?
Well, for me, it's just what we were talking about. I mean, something absolutely a marvel of nature, something gorgeous, something exotic, something unknown, and something very dangerous. They have killed people, apparently. I didn't know anything about them before. I passed ostrich farms, but that was about the extent of my familiarity or interest in the large flightless birds. I never thought about them. And because I know her other work, hey, Patrick, because I know her other work, I kind of know where she's coming from. Yeah, I mean, she's very interested in the other, as we mentioned before, and in living versus existing, maybe, going through your life confined to a smaller and smaller emotional space, or being open to the magic of things like cassowaries. Also, often in her stories, the animals behave in much more ethical ways than the people do.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick.
Oh, I was going to say,
Did you have a question?
I was going to make a comment. I spent half a day in the company of a guide in Australia who told me a story of a friend of his who was killed by her pet cassowary. So I was expecting the story to go in a quite different direction. I thought he was going to get done.
I think he killed the bird.
Mm.
You think so, because he mentioned, but there was that one sentence that grabbed me a lot where he didn't feel anything right at that moment but sorrow. Do you remember that? She calls it a pale blue sorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's like a worse kind of sorrow than like a green sorrow. I mean, it just seems so terribly sad. So if you, and there's also that whole beware of pity thing, right? That lurks in the background. If you're really sorry for something or someone, you can get yourself involved to the point where you get the knife in the neck instead of the other way around. And so I'm going to ask her if she read that same article about the guy who was killed by the cassowary, or what was it exactly that prompted her to write this story. I will ask her that. And I'll come up with some maybe responses, and then maybe she'll get to watch this, the recording of this, and hear your questions and respond to them. And I think that would be a lot of fun. See what the author has to say.
Before we close,
I'm just a translator. You don't kill the messenger. Right? I don't really know what she meant. I don't know.
You mentioned about the exotic nature of the cassowary and the dangerous nature of the cassowary and the beautiful nature of the cassowary. And wonder, and that this is another silly thought, is that we were brought into the story by going to that evangelical church, and we ended the story with an evangelical church as well, the same one, I guess. But I'm thinking maybe that was the also exotic and strange and dangerous and beautiful, and maybe that has something to do with the story. I don't know. I as I say, a silly idea that came up when you were talking.
Well, somebody said before, was it, I can't remember who brought up the point, very valid point, that evangelical churches are not exactly abundant in Argentina. I can't remember who brought up that point earlier. It's true. It is a little bit exotic. You don't find them on every street corner. People tend to be Catholic or nothing. Or, I mean, there's a large Jewish community and there's a Muslim community, but Protestantism didn't really make great inroads. And unlike in other Latin American countries, in Argentina, it didn't make great inroads, and it's the exception, you know. So maybe he just went in there not even knowing what it was, just needed a place to gather his thoughts and to go over that experience, because the whole story is a flashback. And then it returns to the present at the end when you're back at the church.
Yeah, well, another silly thing came to mind too, and that in the movie The Popes, remember that there's a point where the Pope, when he was this young scamp, jumps into a church, and that begins his transformation as well. So that has nothing to do with what we're talking here, but it's interesting. That's Argentina.
Yeah, but he is from Argentina.
Yes.
Francis. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Andrea. This has been
Who knows? Maybe he went to that. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you guys so much for joining me here.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Hope to see you in real life.
A pleasure for us too. Thank you so much for coming back.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Andrea. Bye-bye.
It was a joy.